In the small town of Bradford, Ohio, Jack and Linda Myers were considered the epitome of a perfect family. They were successful in business, running a pizzeria and managing a rental property. The couple was also loving grandparents to their young grandson, Damien, whom they had raised as their own. With a peaceful life on their expansive farm and a reputation for kindness and generosity, Jack and Linda had everything anyone could want. But that all changed one fateful morning in March 2003, when a brutal tragedy struck their home. The small town was rocked by the shocking news of their deaths. Jack and Linda were found murdered, their lives taken in a violent attack. What was even more disturbing was that their 4-year-old grandson Damien was the only witness. Covered in blood but miraculously unharmed, Damien claimed that his grandparents had melted in their bed, unable to comprehend the horror that had just unfolded. The police and the community were left to wonder, who could commit such a ruthless act against a family so well-liked? The truth was closer than anyone imagined, hidden in the dark corners of their own family. The question remained, who could have wanted them dead, and why? Bradford was a small, quiet town in Ohio, known for its peaceful atmosphere and close-knit community. On the outskirts of town, nestled on a farm, lived Jack and Linda Myers. Though both were in their 50s, they were far from slowing down. The couple ran a local pizzeria, a modest business they had built together over the years. They also dabbled in auto repair, using their skills to fix up cars, and owned several rental properties that provided them with a steady income. The Myers farm, with its 40-acre stretch of land, was their sanctuary, where they lived a comfortable and fulfilling life. Linda had a daughter, Amber, who, when she was a teenager, found herself unexpectedly pregnant. The pregnancy was a challenge, but Linda and Jack stood by their daughter, offering support and love when Amber decided to keep the baby. They helped raise Amber's son, Damien, as their own. Jack and Linda poured all their energy into giving Damien a stable and loving environment, as they believed family was everything. Over the years, they became not only pillars of their family, but also respected members of the community. They were always there for their neighbors, known for their kindness and generosity. By 2003, the Myers family had built a life that many envied. Amber had grown up, and despite the challenges of her teenage pregnancy, she was now attending college, striving for a better future. Damien, now a young child, was thriving in a stable home with his grandparents, who continued to guide and support him. Life seemed to be on a steady course, with no signs of the dark turn that was about to shake their world. Jack and Linda were content, their family was intact, and their future appeared bright. They were the kind of couple everyone admired, their success and devotion to family something others could only hope to emulate. The Myers family had always appeared to be the epitome of happiness and stability. But in the months leading up to the tragedy, subtle signs of unease began to emerge. Amber, despite the unwavering support of her parents, still struggled with uncertainty about her future. Although she had managed to stabilize her life to some extent, the weight of her past choices still lingered, and she felt the pressure of living up to the expectations that her parents had set for her. Jack and Linda continued their daily routines, running the pizzeria and maintaining their rental properties, but a growing concern began to cloud their otherwise peaceful lives. Their older son, Greg, had been a source of worry for some time. Despite the opportunities and support his parents had provided him, Greg had been unable to maintain steady work. His finances had spiraled out of control, and he had fallen behind on rent, unable to pay his bills. He had reached out to his father for help, but Jack, though sympathetic, refused to bail him out, believing that it was time for Greg to take responsibility for his own actions. This refusal to help further strained their already fragile relationship. Meanwhile, life in the small town seemed to carry on as usual, with its quiet rhythms and predictable patterns. However, even in such a serene place, strange things began to happen. One morning, a neighbor of the Myers family who lived a few houses down noticed something unusual. At 4:40 a.m., she saw an unfamiliar van parked in front of the Myers house. the van seemed out of place, especially given the time of day. But, as often happens in small towns, no one thought much of it at the time. People had become accustomed to the occasional oddities in their otherwise peaceful community. It wasn't until the next day when the tragedy struck that the significance of this strange event began to make sense. The van, it seemed, had been an omen, a quiet herald of the darkness that was about to descend on the Myers family. On the morning of March 27, 2003, at 9:15 a.m., an unsettling call came into the local daycare center. A 4-year-old boy, Damien, arrived alone, his clothes soaked in blood but with no visible injuries. In a dazed state, he claimed that his grandparents, Jack and Linda Myers, had melted. The teacher, immediately alarmed by the sight of the blood-covered child, quickly contacted the police. Given the bizarre nature of the situation, the authorities decided to send officers not only to the daycare but also directly to the Myers farm. When the police arrived at the Myers property, they found the front door wide open. The house, typically a bustling place of activity, was eerily silent. Officers cautiously entered, making their way through the living room and into the bedroom where they found the lifeless bodies of Jack and Linda on their bed. Both were covered in blood. Jack had suffered a gunshot wound to the back of the head, while Linda had been shot in the face. It was evident that the attack had happened in the middle of the night. Both victims had not shown any signs of a struggle. They had been taken completely by surprise and had never had the chance to defend themselves. What was even more disturbing was the realization that Damien had not heard the gunshots. How was it possible that such a violent attack had occurred in the same house, yet the child had slept through it? This strange fact seemed to be a blessing in disguise, as it had spared his life. But it also raised more questions. How had Damien managed to escape the fate of his grandparents? And why had he only discovered their deaths so late? The lack of evidence that Damien had been physically harmed and his unknowing escape from the crime scene added to the mystery surrounding the case, leaving the investigators puzzled as to how he had been spared. The scene was baffling, and the answers seemed to lie somewhere in the stillness of the house, hidden behind the walls of the seemingly ordinary Myers family life. As the investigation unfolded, detectives began to explore every possible angle. At first, they suspected a robbery gone wrong, but soon it became clear that this was not the case. The house was filled with valuables, yet nothing appeared to have been taken. This fact pointed toward a more personal motive behind the murders. The investigators noted several bloodstains found throughout the house, suggesting that the killer had likely known the layout of the home well, including how to bypass the security system. Whoever had committed this crime was familiar with the property, and the ease with which they had entered the home raised suspicions about the attacker's identity. As detectives delved deeper into the case, they began interviewing neighbors and collecting additional evidence. One key lead came from a neighbor who reported seeing an unfamiliar van parked near the Myers property at 4:40 a.m. on the morning of the murders. The sighting was odd, as it was unusual for anyone to be out at that hour, especially in such a quiet neighborhood. This piece of information seemed insignificant at first, but later became a crucial part of the investigation, hinting that the killer might have been someone with access to the area or at least familiar with the neighborhood's routine. Additionally, the detectives discovered a peculiar detail at the crime scene. Shoe prints found near the bodies were not consistent with the sizes of Jack or Linda or anyone else in the house. The prints appeared to belong to someone with smaller feet, a crucial clue that shifted the investigation's focus. This new evidence suggested that the killer was likely not a member of the immediate family, but instead someone else who had access to the home. The shoe prints, along with the van sighting, pointed toward a new direction. The investigation had taken a turn, and the detectives now believed that the truth behind the murders was much closer to home than they initially thought. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that this was not just an ordinary crime, but one driven by hidden motives and deep secrets. As the investigation continued, the detectives' focus shifted to Greg, Jack's older son from his first marriage. Greg had always been a troubled figure in the family. He struggled to keep a steady job, his finances were in disarray, and he had accumulated a significant amount of debt. His reckless behavior and inability to manage his life had caused tension between him and his father. In the weeks leading up to the murders, several neighbors and family members had noticed heated arguments between Greg and Jack, often about money and Greg's failure to take responsibility. What raised further suspicion was the fact that Greg had been asking around about where to purchase a firearm, a detail that was not lost on the investigators. When the detectives brought Greg in for questioning, he was calm and insistent, claiming that he had been at home, asleep, on the night of the murders. However, his alibi soon began to unravel as new evidence surfaced. The investigators discovered that Greg owned a van identical to the one seen by a neighbor parked outside the Myers property at 4:40 a.m. on the morning of the killings. This revelation was enough to raise serious doubts about his story. Further examination of the crime scene revealed another crucial detail: shoe prints that were too small to belong to Jack or Linda, and clearly did not match anyone else in the household. The size of the prints indicated that the killer was likely someone other than the victims or their immediate family. The discovery of the van, combined with the shoe prints, placed Greg in close proximity to the crime scene during the time of the murders. This marked a turning point in the case. What had initially seemed like an open and shut case of a robbery gone wrong had now evolved into a more complicated and troubling scenario. Greg's connection to the crime, while not yet conclusive, was becoming harder to ignore. The detectives now had a suspect, and the search for concrete evidence to link him directly to the murders had become their primary focus. As the investigation progressed, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Detectives discovered that Greg had purchased the gun that was used in the murders. This revelation, coupled with the forensic evidence found at the crime scene, pointed directly to him. The gun matched the bullet casings recovered from the Myers home, and further examination of the evidence confirmed that Greg's fingerprints were on the weapon. While there was no direct confession, the circumstantial evidence was damning, and the police were now confident that Greg was the killer. During the trial, Greg maintained his innocence. He denied any involvement in the deaths of his parents, insisting that he had nothing to do with the murders. However, the prosecution presented a compelling case, outlining the financial motive behind the crime. Greg's debts and his desperate need for money were the driving forces behind his actions. The death of Jack and Linda would allow him to inherit their property and business, solving his financial troubles once and for all. Expert testimony and witness statements painted a clear picture of Greg's greed and his willingness to kill for it. The case was difficult for the family, especially for Amber, Damien's mother. While the trial was a painful reminder of their loss, it also brought clarity to the tragedy. Amber was devastated by the fact that her own brother had been the one to kill their parents, but she understood that she needed to move forward for the sake of her son. The trial and the subsequent conviction of Greg brought some measure of justice, though the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. As for Damien, the trauma of witnessing such horrific events at such a young age stayed with him for years. He struggled with nightmares and the weight of his memories. But as time passed, he began to find a way to cope. With the support of his mother and the rest of his family, Damien gradually rebuilt his life. The events of that fateful day never left him, but they no longer defined him. He grew into a young man determined to live a life that would honor the memory of his grandparents, who had raised him with love and care. Despite the tragedy, he found a path forward, working hard to create a future for himself, free from the shadows of his past.